I grew up believing the world outside was dangerous, that safety could only be found in the truth, that my family would be forever as long as I obeyed. But no one ever told me that one day my own father would cross the street just to avoid looking me in the eyes. That silence, that deliberate silence, was the loudest sound I've ever heard. He didn't curse me, he didn't scream, he just erased me. Maybe it sounds dramatic, maybe it even sounds fake to people who haven't lived it. But if you've ever belonged to a religion where loyalty to the doctrine is more important than the love you share with your own child, then you already know exactly what I mean. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from betrayal, but from obedience. I'm not here to expose names or to make a spectacle of grief. I'm here because someone out there is still feeling what I felt, and maybe they think they're alone. So this is for you. My name doesn't matter, but my story does.
Let me take you back to a Saturday morning. I must have been 7 years old. My dad was adjusting his tie in the mirror. I was sitting on the edge of the bed trying to button up my shirt, the one with the stiff collar that always scratched my neck. He looked at me through the mirror and said, "A smart man can be fooled, but a spiritual man, never." At that age, I didn't understand what he meant, but I remembered it. I carried it like a secret code I'd one day unlock. He was like that, always saying things that felt bigger than the room we were in. He had presence, not just physically, but spiritually, like he walked in step with something holier, something higher. I worshipped him the way children do, not blindly, but fully. Sundays were pancake mornings, just him and me in the kitchen. He'd pour the batter into the pan with a little smile and say, "Honey instead of sugar, like the Bible says." A joke, but not really. He called me his little soldier, a warrior for Jehovah. He'd say it with pride, clapping his hand on my back. And I believed it. I believed him. That his love was permanent. That nothing could ever change it. But I was wrong.
As you'll come to see, the religion I grew up in wasn't just a set of beliefs. It was the glue that held my family together. Or so I thought. And what happens when someone starts pulling at the seams? What happens when you realize that the glue was never love? It was fear. I didn't walk away overnight. There wasn't a dramatic exit, no storming out, no big announcement. It started quietly, invisibly. A thought, a doubt, a silence that stretched between my father and me, not just across a room, but eventually across entire years. This is not a story about rebellion. It's a story about longing, about watching the man who once taught me how to ride a bike pretend I no longer exists. There was a time when my dad was the safest place in the world. Not just because he provided or protected, but because he saw me. Really saw me. I can still picture him at the dinner table, head bowed in prayer, fingers interlaced like he was holding something fragile, something divine. His voice was calm but firm, and even though I didn't understand half the scriptures he quoted, I listened like they were sacred spells. I don't think I ever told him, but I admired how sure he was. He never hesitated, never stammered. He just knew what was right, what was wrong, what was godly, what wasn't. And when you're a child, certainty like that feels like safety. He had this ritual every night, opening the Bible, clearing his throat, and reading to us like a storyteller with a message that could save the world. Except it wasn't fiction. It was life and death, heaven or destruction. We weren't just a family. We were a spiritual unit. My mom always said he was a rock.
But I think that's what scared me later, realizing that a rock doesn't bend, it doesn't move, it doesn't change. But back then, I didn't see that. All I saw was a father who made time for me, who taught me how to tie a tie, how to shake hands firmly, how to sit up straight and carry yourself like someone who knows the truth.
There's this memory that keeps playing in my head. I'm 10. We're at the district convention. It's scorching hot. Everyone's in suits, sweating, fanning themselves with the program booklets. But Dad is standing tall, straight-faced, Bible in hand, not flinching. I start to shift in my seat. I'm tired, bored, dreaming about cartoons. He notices, leans over and whispers, "A true servant endures to the end." That line burned into my brain like scripture. I straightened up because disappointing him felt like disappointing God. And isn't that what they taught us? That obedience was love, that questioning was weakness, that loyalty was tested through silence and submission. He used to carry me on his shoulders through the park, used to sit next to me in bed when I had nightmares, used to sing quietly while doing dishes, hymns that back then sounded like lullabies.
He even made me a wooden toy car once from scratch, painted it blue like the one I said I wanted from the store. I remember running my fingers along the edges, thinking that no gift had ever meant more. He didn't say, "I love you," often, but he didn't have to. His version of love came in actions. He believed that protecting my soul was more important than comforting my feelings. He once told me, "I'd rather see you cry for discipline than suffer for disobedience." At the time, it sounded noble, like something a strong father would say. Only later did I realize he was preparing me to be loved conditionally. Looking back, I wonder if he ever saw the shift in my eyes, the way I started hesitating before answering questions at the meetings, the way I flinched when someone called me exemplary. Did he notice the tension building behind my polite yeses? Or was he so confident in the structure of our faith, in the tight web of rules and repetition, that he thought I could never slip through it? Maybe he believed love and doctrine were the same thing. Maybe to him, there was no difference between being my father and being my overseer.
Still, I miss him. Not the man he became, but the man who used to wait up for me at night. The man who drove me to my first school speech and told me afterward, with that rare, proud smile, "You spoke like someone who lives the truth." That sentence used to make me glow. Now it makes me ache, because I still speak the truth. It's just no longer his. Adolescence inside the organization didn't come with freedom. It came with responsibility. More meetings, more expectations, more pressure to be an example, especially as an elder son. By the time I was 13, I already knew how to give comments at the meetings, how to underline my Watchtower study the right way, how to spot worldly influences in music and clothing and movies. I knew how to smile and stay silent. I knew that doubt was a sin you committed in silence, and I committed it often.
It started slow, like a leak behind a wall, not enough to flood the room, just enough to make it damp, just enough to make me uncomfortable. I remember sitting at a Sunday meeting once. The brother was speaking about Armageddon, how soon the wicked would be destroyed, how we had to stay clean to survive. Everyone around me nodded.
but I couldn't stop thinking. What kind of God needs to kill billions to prove a point? The thought stared me, not because it was offensive, but because it made sense. That was the beginning of something I didn't yet have the words for. Still, I played my part. I wore the suit, I gave the talks, I knocked on doors. There was this one Saturday morning, it was raining, but we were still doing field service. I was with my dad. A man answered the door with his daughter clinging to his leg, sleepy-eyed and confused. He looked annoyed. I started to speak, the usual introduction about the Bible, offering answers. But mid-sentence, I looked at the little girl. She was scared. Not of us, but of being left alone again. And I realized we were interrupting a family. We weren't helping. We weren't saving. We were intruding. I didn't say anything that day, but I started saying less after that. Smiling less, volunteering less.
At school, things weren't easier. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't stand for the national anthem, the one who skipped birthday parties and couldn't join clubs or go on field trips. I was different, but not in a way anyone admired. There was a girl, Louisa. She had soft eyes and loud thoughts. She asked too many questions in class, laughed too freely, and once offered me a book, The Catcher in the Rye. I took it, hid it under my mattress, read it in pieces, my heart pounding with every page. It wasn't just a story. It was real, honest, flawed, human. And I felt seen, more than I ever had reading any religious publication. Of course, I got caught. My dad found it one evening when helping me change the sheets. He didn't say anything at first, just held it in his hand, staring at the cover like it was radioactive. Then he asked, "Is this what you want now? To pollute your mind with apostate fiction?" I stammered, said I didn't even finish it, that it was just curiosity. His voice was flat when he said, "Curiosity is what led Eve to eat the fruit." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. That line cut deeper than a shout ever could. I apologized, gave up the book, but inside, something stayed with me. The feeling that I wasn't allowed to explore, that my thoughts had become dangerous, that my father didn't want to know what I felt, only whether or not I was still obedient. After that, I learned to compartmentalize, smile at the meetings, daydream during the Watchtower study, avoid eye contact with the elders, and keep my questions buried. There was one night I cried in the dark, quietly, afraid my parents would hear. Not because I had sinned, not because I had broken a rule, but because I was starting to feel like I didn't belong. And that realization in our world was terrifying. They said the path to life was narrow, but what they didn't say was that walking it alone would feel like dying slowly, while everyone else smiled and called it salvation. They always taught us that Satan works in whispers, that he doesn't kick down the door, he slides through the cracks, through music, through books, through questions. But what no one ever warned me about was silence. That long, growing silence between what I was told to believe and what I actually felt. It didn't start with some scandal. There was no explosive moment. It was a slow, quiet fracture. Like the hairline crack in a cup you'd been drinking from your whole life, invisible until the moment it leaks. I remember a brother giving a talk one evening about loyalty to the organization. He said, "Even if we don't understand something, we obey first. Understanding will follow." Everyone nodded, and I nodded too. But inside, I felt something break.
Because I had been obeying for years, praying, studying, preaching, and the more I obeyed, the less I understood. Why were the questions always met with suspicion? Why was doubt treated like disease? One night, I was alone in my room, scrolling through my old MP3 player. I had hidden a few worldly songs inside folders with fake names. Just soft music, nothing explicit. But one lyric caught me off guard. It said, "Your soul was never meant to be caged by someone else's fear." I froze, replayed it. And that's when I felt it, a wave of grief I couldn't name. Because that's what it was, really. Grief. I wasn't just questioning the doctrine, I was mourning the version of me who never got to ask. It was around that time that I found a forum online. Nothing dramatic, no dark web of apostasy, just a site where former members shared stories. I told myself I was just curious, just trying to understand both sides, like the elders warned us not to do. But the moment I started reading, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. They described exactly what I was feeling. The guilt, the fear, the suffocation, and most of all, the loneliness. Until then, I thought I was broken, but I wasn't. I was just not alone. My dad noticed the shift before I ever said a word. He could read me like a scripture. He started asking more questions, subtle at first. "You've been quiet at the meetings. Everything okay with your study habits? Are you praying like before?" And I lied. Soft, strategic lies, because I wasn't ready to be honest. Because honesty in that house had a price. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found him sitting with the circuit overseer. They lowered their voices when I entered. I pretended not to notice. Later that night, he said, "I want you to know something. If you ever step away from Jehovah, you're stepping away from me too." He said it quietly, not as a threat, as a promise. And it terrified me. Because for the first time in my life, I realized there was a condition on his love. That if I changed what I believed, I'd stop being his son. I didn't leave that day. I didn't pack a bag or make a scene. But inside me, something shifted. Forever. That was the first fracture. The moment the foundation, the one I thought was love, showed its first crack. I used to think silence was neutral. Just the absence of sound, just a pause, a breath. But silence in that world, it was a weapon, a verdict, a door slowly closing, not with a slam, but with a click you can't unhear. After I stopped going to the meetings regularly, it didn't take long for the space around me to change. The texts stopped. The invitations dried up. Even the way people looked at me felt different. They didn't confront me. That would have been too merciful. Instead, they vanished.
My mother tried to keep a gentle tone. She asked if I was just going through a phase, if maybe I was tired or struggling with my schedule. But behind her questions was fear. Fear of what my doubts meant for her. Fear that her son was becoming one of them. One night, she knocked on my door after dinner. Her voice soft, her hands twisting a dish towel she hadn't realized she was holding. "Your father doesn't want to talk about it, but he's disappointed. He says your spirit has changed." Spirit? That word hit harder than it should have.
Because what she meant, what they all meant, was that I was no longer safe. The elders came once. Just once. They didn't come inside. They stood on the porch like salesmen with sad eyes. Offered to study with me, to help me find my way back. But behind their questions was fear. Fear of what my doubts meant for her. Fear that her son was becoming one of them. I told them I appreciated the offer, but I was okay. One of them, Brother Marcos, lowered his voice and said, "There's no safety outside Jehovah's arrangement. You know that." I nodded. He patted my shoulder, and they left. They never came back. Time passed, and the absence became normal. Painfully normal. I sat alone at the dinner table more nights than I can count. My dad would eat in silence, eyes fixed on the TV. No more questions, no more lectures, just distance. One night I coughed during the meal, and he didn't even look up. That moment broke something in me that no scripture ever had. Worse than losing my friends was losing my name. I was no longer so-and-so's son, no longer the good example, the quiet but spiritual one. I became a warning, a whisper, a cautionary tale spoken about in cars and kitchen corners. At a gathering, the last one I ever went to, I overheard someone say, "Such a shame. He had such a strong upbringing. Just proves Satan's always working." I was 5 feet away. They didn't even lower their voices. But the moment that gutted me came months later. It was my birthday. Not that we ever celebrated, but still, it was a date that meant something to me, if only in secret. That day, I got a message from my grandmother. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year. The message was short, no greeting, no warmth. It read, "I pray Jehovah ends your suffering before Armageddon, so you don't have to die as an enemy." I stared at it for a long time, read it over and over, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. She wasn't angry. She was sad. She truly believed I was already dead, that all that was left now was paperwork. This is what they don't tell you when you question your faith. It's not just belief you're losing. It's birthdays, glances, shared laughter, old photos. It's being seen. It's walking through your own house like a ghost. Still breathing, still speaking, but no one dares to say your name. It was a Tuesday. I remember because it was raining. That cold, sticky rain that feels like it knows what kind of day you're having. I was sick. Not a cold or the flu, something worse. Chest pain, nausea, dizziness. It had been building up for days, and I finally couldn't take it anymore. I told my mom I needed to go to the hospital. She looked concerned for a second. Then she said, "Let me ask your father." She always asked, even about things she didn't need to. He was in the living room, reading. The Bible, of course. She came back and said, "Maybe you're just anxious. Have you been praying about it?" I went anyway. Alone. I sat for 4 hours in the ER with nothing but a phone that had no one to call. No messages. Not even a "let me know how it goes." Not even from my parents. That was the moment. That was when I realized I had already been cut off. Not with words, not with an announcement, but with absence.
You think the worst part is when they disfellowship you, when they make it official. But it's not. The worst part is the gray zone. When you're still technically in, but already treated like you're not. When love becomes conditional before the doctrine does. That night, I came home around midnight. I walked into the house quietly. No one was up, but the hallway light was on. There was a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "Make sure to turn off the lights next time. We're not made of money." That was it. Not, "How are you?" Not, "What did the doctor say?" Just a reminder about the electric bill. And somehow, that hurt more than if they had just screamed at me. Because it wasn't cruelty. It was nothing. And nothingness, from the people who once held you, that's the deepest cut of all. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling for hours. My chest still hurt, but it wasn't physical anymore. It was grief. It was the realization that I had been erased in real time, slowly, like a name fading from a gravestone in the rain. The next morning, my dad passed by me in the hallway. Didn't stop, didn't ask. He just said, "Don't forget the meeting is at 7. I nodded, but I didn't go. And he didn't ask why. That was the last time I felt like his son. Not because he told me I wasn't, but because he acted like I never had been. Healing doesn't start with hope. It starts with survival. You don't wake up one day and feel whole again. You wake up and realize you made it through one more day without breaking, without calling them, without begging to be let back in. That's where I was. Alone, still grieving, still aching, but breathing. And for the first time in years, that felt like something. I started journaling, not with any plan or intention, just writing what I felt. One night I wrote, "I miss them, but I don't miss who I had to be loved by them." Reading it back felt like confession, because that was the truth. I missed the memories, the comfort, the familiarity, but not the constant fear of disappointing God through being myself. A few weeks later, I stumbled on a support group online, former Jehovah's Witnesses, like me. Not angry, not loud, just honest. There was a woman there named Maya. She was older, had been out for over a decade. One night in the group chat, I told her, "I feel like a traitor." She replied, "You didn't betray your faith. You finally told the truth about who you are." I cried that night, not because I was sad, but because someone saw me again, without conditions, without doctrine, just as a person.
That moment cracked something open inside me. I started reading books again, not just religious ones, philosophy, psychology, even poetry. I listened to music with no guilt. I watched movies without dissecting them for hidden spiritual dangers. And I started therapy. The first session, the therapist asked, "Tell me what brings you here." I said, "I need to find out who I am without fear." She nodded like that made perfect sense. It was the first time I said it out loud, and it felt like stepping into sunlight after living underground. The rebuilding wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. Some nights I still felt hollow. I still reached for my phone, hoping maybe, just maybe, there'd be a message from my dad. Some acknowledgement, some crack in the wall. But it never came. So instead, I started writing letters I never sent. One of them ended with, "I still love you. I just don't belong to your version of love anymore." Over time, the ache turned into distance. Not numbness, just space, enough to breathe. I started laughing again. Real laughter, the kind that comes from your chest, not your mask. I met people who didn't care where I came from, only where I wanted to go. And little by little, I stopped defining myself by what I had lost. Because I hadn't lost everything. I had found something too. Me. Maybe he'll never call. Maybe the man who taught me to ride a bike, who stood tall beside me at the meetings, who used to bless me before I went to sleep, really is gone. Still alive, but unreachable. And I've stopped waiting. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I stopped holding my healing hostage to his silence. I used to think forgiveness meant reunion. That to forgive, I had to welcome him back, undo the pain, pretend it didn't shape me. But I don't believe that anymore. Forgiveness for me is waking up and not needing revenge. It's letting the memory of his voice pass through me without burning. It's knowing that I can grieve the father I lost, even while accepting he's still breathing somewhere, just not in my life. The truth is, he taught me how to be loyal, even if he didn't know it, because now I'm loyal to something else, to my truth, to my peace, to the version of me that was always hiding behind doctrine, waiting for permission to exist. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what he'd say if he saw me now. Not the child he remembers, not the disappointed son, but me, free, flawed, still healing, but whole. Would he recognize me? Would he care? And even if he didn't, even if he never reaches back across that distance, I know who I am. And I finally know that I was never the problem. I was the proof that love without freedom isn't love at all. If you're reading this, listening to this, watching this, and you feel like I did, like the silence is swallowing you whole, like you're being erased for simply becoming yourself, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. You were never alone. There's a world outside that guilt. There's life beyond a cage. It's terrifying, yes, but it's real, and it's yours. No, I didn't get my father back, but I found a new kind of family, one built on truth, not fear, one where love doesn't demand obedience, but offers understanding. And that's where love begins again, not in the past, but right here, right now, where you choose yourself, even when they don't.